Most pastors and church leaders love their congregations and would sacrifice just about everything for them. But there are cases of toxic church leaders. How can you know? How can you know a leader is toxic? What are the signs? We're going to discuss in today's episode. You may not like someone, but that does not make them toxic. Toxic leaders are dangerous. And danger can even mean charismatic. So you can be charismatic and liked and still be dangerous, or you can hold positional power and be feared. And so that's kind of the two categories. I'm overgeneralizing here. Two categories of toxic leaders: likable and charismatic, but very dangerous; feared with positional power and dangerous. But how do you know? Dad,
Oh,
you've written
the
on this. This episode is based on one of your more popular posts at Church Answers.
and you're right. Negativity does not equal toxicity, and dislike does not equal toxicity. Just because I don't like someone does not mean that person is toxic. But I think these 8 signs that we're going to go through are telltale signs. And this first one, I can tell story after story. I can tell story of HOA. I can tell story of churches, but they're autocrats. And one of the things that they don't do is they don't welcome accountability. And for example, I'm thinking of a toxic pastor, and this is several years ago. But one thing that pastor would not do, he wouldn't let anyone see the financial statements except himself. And he ended up getting so much pressure. He put some type of framework of a financial statement out that actually made no sense. But he was holding all the financial information to himself. Can you imagine the abuse that would take place there?
Yeah, run from that church. If the pastor holds the keys to the financial statements and won't let anybody see it, you have absolutely that's all I need to hear. I don't even hear anything else. That one thing alone is enough to leave a church. The fact that somebody would be in a position of power and regularly dismiss accountability. So we're talking about patterns of behavior here, not the one-off thing. And just because someone did something bad one time doesn't everything everyone makes mistakes and everyone messes up. And sometimes people mess up in big ways, but that doesn't make you toxic. These are patterns of behavior. And a pattern of regularly dismissing accountability is definitely a sign. And we put it first for a reason because I would say of all of these, it's probably the one that is most concerning to me when I talk to somebody and I'm in a situation where I'm consulting or something. And, well, there's no accountability. They don't want accountability, and they're pushing back on systems of accountability. That's where all the red flags begin.
And ironically, in the second sign, here's your sign that you are a toxic leader. The second one is, and it happened in this particular church, once the critics started coming in saying, "You're not letting us see financial statements. You're keeping that from us," he became the victim, and he started saying, "I can't believe all these people are criticizing me." So it went from autocrat to a seemingly natural transition to I'm the victim because people are blaming me for this.
Yeah, I believe we call that gaslighting. That term has been thrown around a lot of late, but yeah, when you when you move from autocrat to victim, that is a telltale sign of something is seriously wrong, and questions of toxicity start to come up. You can't be both. You can't be both an autocrat and a victim. And if you're playing both those, then yeah, that's a definite sign of toxicity.
Yep. Run on number one, run faster on number two.
Yeah, and I will also add point number 3 here. Toxic church leaders abuse power to elevate themselves. So I'm going to put myself in a position of power, or I'm going to grab for power, or I'm going to seek power, gain that power in order to put myself up above others. Now, this one's a little harder to kind of discern because we're talking about motive here. If somebody's just saying they don't want accountability, who cares what the motive is? It's wrong.
Right.
Here is there's a little bit more of a nuance because anytime you start talking about someone's motives, unless they've made them apparent It's hard to know. But I think you can see the pattern there of somebody abusing power to elevate themselves. It's not just seeking power, but abusing the power that they've gained to push others down and to pull themselves up.
Right. Also, toxic church leaders do not practice spiritual disciplines. They do not exhibit the fruit of the Spirit. One of my favorite persons to talk about this is Brad Wagner, who's part of the Church Answers team. And Brad will often say, you know, those of us who are in theologically conservative circles, or just say those of us who believe in the full authority of Scripture, many times we will demonstrate that we have the head knowledge, but we don't have the heart behavior. And so we have these patterns of telling everybody that they are doctrinally in error, which fine if they are, do so, if, especially if it's serious. But we also are not showing any fruit of the spirit that means that we are living the doctrines as well as believing the doctrines.
Yeah, the Bible, when it comes to qualifications of a pastor, so let's just apply this to pastors. The Bible elevates hospitality and gentleness just as much as doctrine.
Yes.
And we forget that being inhospitable and not being gentle, are just as much disqualifiers for ministry as not having good doctrine. So if you are using truth as a club, well, you're not speaking the truth in love. So it's a sign. It's certainly a sign of toxicity, especially if things like prayer and fasting and devotional time are absent in your life, and you don't see, you know, all of the fruit of the spirit in a church leader's home and in a church leader's life. So you start adding all these things together. Again, any one of these things, but all of them together, you're definitely beginning to see what a toxic leader looks like. The other thing that I'll add, point number 5, is that toxic church leaders have frequent outbursts of anger. So the key here is frequent outbursts of anger over trivial matters.
Yep.
So it's one thing for somebody to have anger at injustice. It's one thing for somebody to have anger at somebody, something that has caused pain in somebody else's life. That would actually be showing Christ-like behavior. It's frequent outbursts of anger over trivial things like, somebody took my parking spot and you lose your mind. That would be a problem. You can see a pattern of toxicity in somebody that has these regular outbursts of anger.
There are leaders, Sam, where eventually the people will leave the organization, leave the church, whatever the case may be, because they know within a few minutes of dealing with that leader, there is going to be some type of outburst. I've been around these type of leaders where you can count on any prolonged conversation with them, any type of presence with them, there's going to be an explosion of anger. That is the pattern. And sometimes it's over trivial matters, sometimes or maybe not so trivial, but because they have so many outbursts, you don't distinguish between the trivial and the important anymore. They're just angry people.
And I will say this: if you are someone who reacts viscerally, people can perceive that as anger. So it's something you need to be careful about. I wear my feelings on my sleeve. Um, I'm just a visceral person. I just am, and I've tried to. It can be a good thing. It can be a bad thing. It's just a personality trait. Um, but I can understand how somebody would perceive me to be angry when I'm like, "Oh, I'm not angry at all. I'm just reacting." So if you have uh, the bent towards being a little more on the emotional side of the spectrum, like me, uh, be careful about that. Be careful about your visceral reactions. Just because you react viscerally doesn't mean you're toxic. So I would say if you're on the receiving end of a visceral reaction, ask yourself the question: "Oh, are they just reacting viscerally, or is this true? Like, is this a real
Is
outburst of anger?"
is this being defensive, where you're asking the people to measure whether your visceral reaction is toxic or not? Do I detect that
Yeah.
you're a little
Uh,
wounded in here, and you're using this forum to
are
defend
you
yourself?
accusing me of toxicity?
I'm
But
not accusing you of toxicity. I'm just saying you do react viscerally, and you grew up with two parents, and one of them is Nellie Joe, and the other one is I. And
mhm.
I wonder where you got that from. It probably
Yeah.
was not your mother.
No, no, it wasn't. But I'm not an angry person. That is something that I know I'm being
That is
defensive,
true. That's
but
true.
I don't really harbor much anger. I just don't. But I can react viscerally to something, and I can understand why people would think that. So I would just say, if you're on the receiving end, just ask yourself the question. This is just a visceral reaction. If you're one who is prone that way, well, be careful. Be careful about how people may think.
And
Um,
toxic leaders as well have a pattern of passive aggressive behavior, which is really marginalization. It is
yeah,
they just no longer speak to you.
this is annoying, and this I think this is where toxicity can just be flat out annoying. Those who marginalize people who express disagreement. And it's not only annoying, it's frustrating, and it can cause a lot of issues in an organization if you squelch dissent regularly. I understand that if there are people who have a pattern of behavior of criticizing, and they're just criticizing just to be mean, they need to be dealt with. In the church, they would need to be dealt with in terms of church discipline. But to just marginalize everybody who expresses a disagreement, particularly if it's somebody who's never really even expressed a disagreement ever, they just kind of have an issue with this one thing, and then they get marginalized. That's if they get marginalized by the leader over just this one thing, and it's not even a pattern of behavior with them, that is a major sign of toxicity.
Well, the
Um,
flip side of this is that they always want sycophants around them.
right, that's point number 7. So we move from point number 6 to point number 7. Because of the marginalization, what happens is the toxic church leader just ends up surrounding himself or herself with sycophants, which again is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's a cycle that feeds itself. It feeds the toxicity because the sycophants have no desire to correct anything that's wrong with the toxic church leader.
Yep, yep, they're there to support the behavior, enable the behavior, and in so many words, to be a part of the behavior as well
Yep.
by being a sycophant.
Yep. Lastly, we'll say this point number 8: toxic church leaders are self absorbed and do not recognize their faults.
So what are
They,
you gonna do? You can't call Ghostbusters, so what are you gonna do? If you
you may
don't
want to zap them. It's been a while since I've seen Ghostbusters, but wouldn't it be great if there was like a pack, like they had those packs and they would zap the ghost, and anytime there was a toxic church leader, you could just zap them. But then that might make you toxic if you want, if you
Yeah,
wanted to
that's
do
right.
that.
If you're hitting people with a Ghostbuster gun, to disable them, you might be toxic as well. But what are you gonna do, Sam? Self-absorbed leaders don't see themselves in the mirror, so how do they correct themselves?
Yeah, and I think in the case of a lot of churches, if you're there, I mean, you have you work with the leader and you try to help them, and if they don't receive it, you got to move on. I mean, there's I would just say there's no reason to stand for toxicity. I mean, there's just no reason to. I mean, do your best for a season, but get out of there. If there's no remedy, just get out of there. I mean that.
And back to your earlier point, everybody that's negative is not toxic. So we're not asking you to get out when you see signs of negativity in a leader. But if you see some of these consistent signs of toxicity, leave if you
Yeah.
can't change it.
Well, thanks for joining us on this episode. I certainly want to do a quick plug for my book, The Church Revitalization Checklist, a hopeful and practical guide for leading your congregation to a brighter tomorrow. So get out of the toxicity and get to a brighter tomorrow. That's the segue here.
Good
The
segue.
link the link to the book is below. We also have a link to our silver membership, and for you who are listening on YouTube, watching on YouTube, we are giving a 30-day trial of our silver membership. Link is below, so you can get in, check it out without, you
Without a
there's no
financial commitment.
there's no financial risk there. We've got almost 2,000 church leaders that are a part of this. They're regularly communicating with each other at Church Answer Central. Um, there's just a lot there. So check out the offer, 30-day trial of our silver membership. And also, please like the video, hit subscribe. We would love to be able to give you more content, free content here on YouTube, and you can visit us at churchanswers.com, where we are growing healthy churches together.
Together.